day that he was scheduled to appear at the Audubon Ballroom, he received a phone call saying, "Today is the day." And Malcolm X could have taken his children and his wife out of the country, because by that time he had friends all over the world. He could have told his wife, "Get the kids ready, we're going to go back to Georgia," but he didn't do that. He told his wife, "Get the kids ready, I want them there with me." And Malcolm X showed up at an event where he knew he might not be able to leave. Dr. King, in the last days of his life, there were over 1,600 man-hours dedicated by the military, U.S. military intelligence, to tracking him. Dr. King knew that he was marked, but it didn't stop him from going back to Memphis. It didn't stop him from giving that speech. And in fact, the last speech that he gave, he said, "I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Dr. King understood that there was a target on his forehead, and he continued and persisted despite that. So I think from afar, I have seen courage. Up close, my father was one of the first black police officers in the city of Atlanta. And he had to suffer all of the indignities that black people suffered. And of course, that meant, as a black police officer, his job was to police black people. If he saw a white person committing a crime, he couldn't arrest him. He could not go into the white side of town to do his job. He could not even wear his uniform inside the Atlanta Police Department. And so he challenged, he fought, he struggled, and most times it was alone, except in those few times when he would put me on his shoulder and I would picket I didn't know what was going on, I was like only 3, but I would picket the police department with him while he was in his uniform all by himself. So I think I've seen courage, and I've benefited. As a black person in the United States, I have benefited from these acts of courage that have been done by average, ordinary people, because the civil rights movement was made by average, ordinary people. That's sort of different. We can get into that a little bit more later. And I want to invite you. I should be a little bit more organized. I should be able to say, okay, you can go here and you can get everything. But if you send me an email, I love to receive emails. I try to answer them all. And I can be reached at Cynthia, my name, at runcynthiarun.org. And the Run Cynthia Run is because I'm always running for something. Most times it's just my life. But always running for something. Cynthia at runcynthiarun.org. I didn't want to forget to say that. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my interest in Libya. I didn't really honestly start out having a particular interest in Libya. I started out, I didn't even mention to you that I served 12 years in the United States Congress. 10 of those years I served on the House International Relations Committee. I also served on the House Armed Services Committee. I studied international relations undergraduate, University of Southern California. Studied international relations at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. At the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, I did ABD, all participation. I've been ABD in so many institutions, it's amazing. But, you know, I'm kind of booky and nerdy. But there was one book that sort of stunned me and woke me up out of maybe a complacency. And that book was by, his name is Shockley, I believe. And basically, he wrote about U.S. policy in Africa. And me, I never thought that I would be in a position to try and craft U.S. policy toward Africa. But after I read that book, and how really politics was just a game, and it didn't matter how many people were killed in this game, that Africans were treated like pawns on the chessboard, and it was all about either occupying geographic space or occupying mineral space, either for strategic reasons or for greed reasons, but never in the interest of the people. And in this book, this CIA station chief was stationed in Angola, and he talked about how Henry Kissinger said, give both sides the weapons and let them just keep killing each other. And they were running drugs, CIA, was running drugs and diamonds and doing all kinds of things. And he basically got fed up and told his story, and he wrote it in this book. He's the first, actually, CIA agent to have written such a book. And I was stunned and shocked when I read it. So years later, then I get elected to Congress, and so I asked to serve on the International Relations Committee, and then later I was able to get on the Armed Services Committee. And I always remembered this is the way the United States does business in Africa. I'm from Africa. I'm one of those stolen children from Africa. I don't know what part of Africa I hail from. And so it's always been sort of a deficiency for me in my identity that I can't go back and trace my roots. It's a, you know, an assignment that's given in elementary school in the United States. The children are given assignments and they go back and they say, where's, you know, great-granddaddy from and great-great-great-granddaddy, and how did they make it over to the United States? And I can't do that. I don't know. And so I end up claiming all of Africa. And while I was in the Congress, I wanted to make sure that in terms of human rights, that the United States would take care of human rights, not because of any UN charter, but just because it's the right thing to do. And I wanted morality to have a place in U.S. policy. So I paid attention. And unfortunately, I learned some things that we can discuss later that about how U.S. policy is made, who actually is involved in the making of U.S. policy, and then sadly, how the strength of the power, the military might of the United States then has its leaders go around the world and coerce or cajole or do whatever it takes in order to get other countries to come along for the ride. But when other countries come along for the ride, I don't think they get the benefits. And the benefits are, we don't want those benefits. But I do understand that in leadership, there's sometimes a transaction. I don't try to engage in that kind of leadership, but some people do. And unfortunately, I've seen the United States and South Africa. I've seen the United States create so-called rebel groups or agents on behalf of the United States, create rebel groups, and then those rebel groups threaten the capital city. And then, of course, the democratically elected leadership has to change its position or suffer regime change. And you could say that that happened in Sierra Leone. I've seen it happen in Zaire while I was in the Congress. And everything that you thought you knew about what happened in Rwanda is probably not true if you got your information from what I call the special interest press or from movies and many books. But I saw that. Now, one of the things that I want to sort of leave with you is this notion of a disorienting dilemma. Because I know that a lot of people think one way about either the United States or certain so-called human rights groups, human rights organizations, and then the reality sometimes is quite different. And this disorienting dilemma is when your values and your expectations are shocked because what you thought you saw isn't actually what is. And I call that hearing their words and seeing them lie. And so for me, a disorienting dilemma was me reading the book, the Shockley book. Another disorienting dilemma was me learning the truth through U.S. government documents about the way they have treated leaders who dare to dissent, inconvenient leaders who dare to dissent, like, for example, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy, and even President John Kennedy as well. So if we live a full life, our whole life can be full of these disorienting dilemmas. So I'm on the Congress, I'm in the Congress, I'm on these committees, and I'm seeing U.S. policy being made, and I'm seeing what operates behind the scenes that nobody else or very few people really see about how and who is making these policies. Then I get, because of my interests, various interests, I get targeted myself for elimination from the Congress because people who ask questions and read books and read the legislation, those are inconvenient members of Congress. And they have to be gotten rid of. And so I got rid of twice. And so now to bring it strictly to Libya. In the winter of 2008 and 2009, I participated in some more challenges to current U.S. policy. And that is because I tried to get into Gaza by way of boat. And you may have heard of the Free Gaza committee. And so Free Gaza contacted me, and they asked me if I would join a vote tomorrow. And it was the first day of the Israel's Operation Cast Lead. And it didn't take me 5 minutes to say, yeah, I'll get on that boat. I didn't know how to swim, didn't realize I was going to need to know how to swim, didn't think about anything other than that we had medical supplies and we were going to get them to the people of Gaza. Well, the long story short, the boat ends up being rammed by the Israelis, and that's when I figured out that, I remembered I didn't know how to swim. And that was a terrifying moment. But it wasn't so terrifying that the cause wasn't just, and so I got on a boat, another boat, 6 months later, and I went to try to make it to Gaza again. This time, the Israelis kidnapped us in international waters, and I spent 7 days in an Israeli prison. George Galloway, I understand, I saw that you have a book out there written by George Galloway, and George Galloway just happened to be in Egypt idling, trying to get the Egyptians to let us in, to let them in. And George Galloway gave me a call and said, why don't you, I'll get you into Gaza. And so I went to Egypt, and we were given 24 hours, so I at least got in to see the death and destruction that had been rained on the people of Gaza by the Israeli military. So, somebody in Libya was watching all of this ordeal with me trying to deal with Gaza. And I got a call asking me if I would come to Libya and if I would bring a delegation of people with me. So I was given the authorization to invite about 20 other people from the United States to go to Libya. The purpose of the invitation was to participate in a conference about the Green Book, and this is the establishment of the Revolutionary Committees, a kind of direct democracy. It was all very new to me, but my colleague, Senator Mike Gravel, was familiar with the Green Book, had traveled to Libya, and he's actually working now to try and get a more direct form of democracy for the United States, and that's been a real struggle. So in October 2009, I go and I learned about the Green Book. We all go and we learn about the Green Book. Then, in January and February of 2011, I was invited to bring another delegation to Libya and the purpose was a conference on Africans in the diaspora. And so there were Africans from all over the continent who had been invited to come, and then Africans in the diaspora had been invited to come. And I was again invited to take a delegation of around 20 people. And so I had with me an African who was from Somalia, who had lived in my district. I had worked with him. He left the United States and went to live in Canada. So I had a representative of Canada. I had many African Americans from the United States, and then I had a person from Haiti also represented in the delegation. And we went there, and it was a wonderful, marvelous meeting. It was almost with the same kind of spirit that many of the people who are here were also at the Afro-Swede meeting last night. And we were talking about the World Conference Against Racism in Durban. And it was that same kind of spirit. And I honestly had never seen African kings and princesses and, you know, sort of African royalty from that often is overlooked, neglected, not treated like the African, like the, you have a royalty here and, you know, over there, you know, it's different. We're in the era of regime change on the African continent anyway, so leaders who don't play along with the system, the new system that's been imposed, don't get that kind of recognition. Well, anyway, it was new for me. And the message focused on a presentation by one African who lives in Europe, and he talked about the brain drain and how much the brain drain actually costs Africa. And there's an interesting, to sort of punctuate that thought, there's an interesting statistic that was recently revealed in U.S. Census, that the immigrant group into the United States with the most PhDs is Nigerians. You would never really think that. But so when this discussion of the brain drain was taking place, there was a specific message that was being delivered, and then that message was delivered. And the message was, if you can't live in dignity in the United States, the Americas, Europe, if you cannot live in dignity there, come back home to Africa. That was the meaning. And for me, that was a fantastic meeting, because all of us seek to have some kind of meaning in our lives. We want to do something that's bigger and better than ourselves. We want to be a part of helping other people. And so this was a call for our servant leadership to go back to Africa if the situation where we live was dire. And then the door was opened for us to begin the development of the African, or our personal contribution to the development of the African continent, to begin that in Libya. That's why we were there in January and February of 2011. And then, when we left, literally must have been while we were on the plane. Because when we landed back in the United States, the media was saying that the Libyan government, Air Force, had fired on its own citizens in Benghazi and in Tripoli. Well, clearly I couldn't believe it. One, because I know my government very well. I just lived through September 11th, and the Bush administration's explanation of what we all witnessed on September 11th just did not make any sense. But because I am a black person in the United States, I know that life in the U.S. is not just the shining hill. It's that gritty underbelly. And that's where I reside. That's my experience. I've seen my leaders and my heroes killed. So I know that I have to question. So I did. that I could get an approximation of the truth, I felt, was to take a delegation of independent journalists there and let them tell what they saw. And so that's what I did. I'm still in debt. I still owe the gentleman who loaned me the money to take these people there, but I thought, for truth's sake, that it was important to get another set of eyes and ears on the ground. And that's what we did. We went as far as we could, for as long as we could, and then we got the heck out of there. But while I was there, what did I see? I saw collective punishment. The embargo meant that even as the bombs were falling and people were being hurt, the embargo meant that no medication was allowed to come into the country. People were hurt and they couldn't get medication. Normal way of life was attacked. People couldn't move because benzene, that's what they use, we call it gasoline in the U.S., but they fuel their cars with benzene. And there was a blockade, an embargo against benzene coming into the country. And this is really interesting because this notion of collective punishment, we've seen that in the case of Israel and Palestine. I saw it personally with the case of the fishermen from Gaza who are not even allowed to catch fish in their own waters. Well, that is exactly what happened in Libya, too. Not even the fishermen could go out, but they get bombed, too. Collective punishment. War crimes. I visited the house where Muammar Gaddafi's grandbabies and son were. And the way the curator, he's just a neighbor, but he is there. The way he describes it, there's a very thick wall. There's the family quarters, and I guarantee you this was no White House. This was no castle. This was no mansion. It was just a regular house. But there was a very thick concrete wall that separated where the children, their swings were, and there were some animals there. And one of the animals was still there when we were there. It was like a little Bambi, a little, we would say a deer, but I think he was
Gazelle.
a gazelle, yes. And he was like shell-shocked, nervous, whatever, darting, but there, still. And it was because Muammar Gaddafi had been on the other side of the cement wall, outside where the animals were, that he wasn't killed then. But this was a targeted assassination. And targeted assassination is illegal. I visited the site of one of the many U.S., Israel, NATO war crimes and allied nations. This was a crime of aggression. supposed to be at the height of international crimes, a crime against the peace. This was a crime against peace. This was a crime of aggression. And I'll get into that when I discuss just a little Slimon Bouchigir, who was the individual that the lawyer referred to, who went to the UN with his story. I have a different story of an interview of Slimon Bouchigir that I invite you to see on the internet, where he tells the truth about the allegations that were made that I couldn't believe coming, there were still people there at that conference. I just couldn't believe it when these events were supposed to happen. Torture, ethnic cleansing, and the treatment of black or Libyans with dark skin. Now, first of all, I understand that the Americans might have been shocked to go into the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya and see black people. But what they probably forgot was that Libya is in Africa. So to try and get rid of people who look like me from Africa is crazy. And I'm outraged still. I visited the family of one Libyan who had dark skin, and Susan Rice and all of the others, Amnesty International, got a video about Amnesty too, where they now are saying, well, they really want to run away from the allegation of these African mercenaries. But it was the NATO and US that was using the mercenaries. It wasn't the Libyans. Well, anyway, so this Libyan of dark skin was targeted by the NATO allies who were Libyan, who presumed that he was an African mercenary worthy of being killed. And they got him, used his cell phone, called his family, told his family, watch what we do to your child on Al Jazeera. You saw this person, probably if you were paying attention to what was going on, because this family that I visited was the family of the Libyan who was hanged, lynched, like I know very well from the United States about lynching. What I didn't know was that Africans do about lynching. So ethnic cleansing and torture. Now, bombing. I was there at the same time that the African Union decided belatedly to send an investigative team. And on that day that they were there, from 11 a.m. to 11:30, we counted, our team of independent journalists counted 89 bombs. And this is going off in Tripoli. Imagine 89 bombs going off in Stockholm. Is there anything that anybody could do in all of Sweden to warrant 89 bombs being dropped on the people of Stockholm? That was just one day. Drones flying over, missiles. I learned to hear the difference between a bomb being dropped and a missile coming across. And I still suffer with, that when, for some reason, there's a lot of military aircraft now in my mother's neighborhood back in Georgia going, and I hear them all, probably going for the next war. And so I will conclude my remarks, and I don't want to get into too much, by saying that what we are witnessing now is a new kind of war, and a more of a new kind of war will be developed and evolved, and there will be new ways of explaining and making people believe that war is good. I'm a part of many tribunals. Bertrand Russell Tribunal on Palestine, one of them. The Perdana Global Peace Organization in Malaysia, and Tun Dr. Mahathir, former Prime Minister of Malaysia, has a campaign that war is a crime. War is always a crime because war is about killing people. And these kinds of wars now that the U.S. military machine is engaged in, I call it sociocide, because we're not just killing people, we're killing whole societies. Look at Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. You can do it militarily or you can do it with a threat politically. Look at Nigeria. I'll mention Nigeria because Nigeria, AFRICOM just did a war game.
Sudan, Congo, Zaire.
That's right. And in the war game, they envisaged 20,000 U.S. troops on the Niger River Delta, that's where the oil is, in a chaotic, anarchic Nigeria. And the war game was set in the year 2013. So I think I tried to learn just a little bit of Swedish. And if kunskap are mocked, then kunskap are ansvar. So I will leave it there, and if there are questions, I would be more than happy to answer questions. I turn the mic over to our moderator.
Well, I'm sure there will be questions, but according to the plan, we are going to have a pause now, and then come back and have a question and discussion after a break. Is that okay?
Yes.
So we take the